Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Priscilla Gutura from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. I'm going to give you a lecture on the context of social work in South Africa. So I'm going to start sharing my slides now. So my lecture that I'm going to give you today will take about 30 minutes, and I'm going to speak about social work in South Africa. I'll provide an overview of the South African context in terms of the socio-economic situation as well as the political context in South Africa, which I believe impact the role of social work in this country, which is characterized with extreme poverty and inequality. I'll also trace the history of oppression and the growth of a racist capitalist state and also the post apartheid era. So, as you can be able to see on the map that I've provided of Africa, South Africa is at the bottom where it's highlighted in green. So when we are talking about the context of South Africa, diversity is actually a key feature of the South African population. And you'd find that in South Africa, we've got 11 official languages, um, and the society is divided racially, historically, and also culturally. In 2021, Statistics South Africa released mid-year population estimates, and it was estimated that the population of South Africa is actually 60.14 million, which comprises of blacks being the majority with 76.4%, and then the whites 9.1%, followed by coloreds 8.9%, and Asians 2.5%. These are actually apartheid race categories, with the so-called colored group being defined as neither black nor white. So these race categories are still important for the purposes of understanding the nature of the society. South Africa is actually ranked the second largest economy in the African continent after Nigeria. But it is ranked 113 out of 189 in the ranking of the Human Development Index, which looks at life expectancy, school attendance, and gross national income per capita. However, South Africa is challenged with high levels of inequality, and it is one of the most uneven income distributions in the world, with a Gini coefficient of 0.63, which was, I think, recorded by the World Population Review in 2021. So, if you go to South Africa, you can be able to see that there is inequality which has worsened over the 2 decades, whereby you'd find that the wealthiest, which are just 10% of the population, they actually own 60% of the national income, whilst 50% of the population only hold less than 10% of the national income. You'd see that the wealthy are mainly white communities, and then the poor, which are impoverished, are the black people that are staying in townships. I've given you a picture to just show the contrast between the rich and the poor, which is greater than ever before. You can be able to see on the left side there that those are where the poor people live in, and then on the right side you can be able to see those mansions where the wealthy people actually live in. And even if you go into the urban cities, you can be able to see the urban contrast, whereby on one side they are the wealthy people that are living there, and then on the other side, it's poverty and the poor people that are squattered in those settlements, which are commonly known as shacks, which are actually built using metal. So that is the urban contrast that you find in South Africa. And then in terms of unemployment, also it's very high. I think yesterday they released the labor force survey released current statistics for the quarter four of 2021, whereby unemployment rate has risen from 34.9% and it is now sitting at 35.3%. And there is youth unemployment, which is categorized as young people aged between 15 to 24 years, and it is sitting at 66.5%. There's also a high number or a high rate of poverty, whereby you see that the poverty rate is estimated at 41.4% of South Africans who are living under the poverty line. If we look at the headcount poverty, then it is sitting at 55.5% of people that are living below the upper bound poverty level of around $78 per person per month, which is equivalent to almost 1,183 rands. So there is a high rate of poverty also that is characterizing South Africa. I mean, because of this poverty and unemployment, the poor people cannot be able to afford electricity, so they actually connect illegally. So I've given you a picture there that is showing the so-called illegal electricity connections in Crossroads in Cape Town, and you can be able to see, I think this is a closer picture which shows you the type of informal settlements where the poor people are living. This one is called Abahlali Basemjondolo Kennedy Road settlement, where you can see that it is overpopulated. The shacks are very close to each other, where the poor people are living. Further, in terms of poverty also, UNICEF in 2020 actually gave statistics that showed that 42% of children are actually living in poverty, multidimensional poverty in areas which include water, sanitation, hygiene, even housing, nutrition, protection, health, child development, and information. And you also be able to see that in these informal settlement areas where the poor people are living, there is poor service delivery and there is increasing levels of state and police violence. There is increased protest, labor action, community protest, which is commonly known as the rebellion of the poor, when they are fighting for actually their rights because of the poverty and the poor service delivery that is happening in their communities. So we can be able to see that this neoliberal capitalist system is actually enriching the wealth and the poor become poorer. So as we are talking about the socio-economic context, I think it is also important to mention that coupled with this HIV, there is HIV and AIDS, which is also very high, where we find that we have 7.8 million people that are living with HIV and AIDS, and 19.1% is actually the adult prevalence, which means that 1 in 5 people in South Africa are living with HIV and AIDS. I think it is also a good point to state that there is high levels of gender-based violence in South Africa, where you'd find that 1 in 5 partnered women have actually experienced physical violence. And in terms of femicide, I think it is 5 times higher in South Africa than the global average rate. And with the coming of the COVID-19 pandemic, it actually worsened the situation that I've discussed. Yeah, the harsh socio-economic conditions in the country, I think they've persisted over a period of time during which the majority of households suffered the lack of opportunity to improve their circumstances. So the COVID-19 actually worsened the situation where you'd find that hunger and food insecurity became more pressing issues. And even the gender-based violence cases, they also increased. And President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's the current president of South Africa, cited that South Africa has got two epidemics, one which is COVID-19 and the second one being gender-based violence. So because of COVID-19 um, lockdown regulations, most of the employment opportunities were halted, and which left many South Africans with the impossible choice of working to provide food or staying home to stay safe. But however, I would like to mention that the South African government then provided a special COVID-19 re- distress relief grant, which was, I think, it was 350 rands, which was given to people that were in need. So South Africa, I think, as a developing country, has a consequence numerous socio-economic challenges in all spheres of life, and specifically in terms of crime and policing, infrastructure, education, health, and even social welfare. But I'd like to mention that the African National Congress, which is the ruling party, political party, ANC, has been the ruling political party since 1994, aiming to redress the national's apartheid legacy of a deliberate and sustained exclusion of the majority of the citizens. So you'd find that the social welfare system in South Africa is actually well established. So it is very important that I highlight the social welfare system in South Africa. So, like I said, it is well established and it is a large proportion of social spending on social grants. So, it is estimated that the social welfare spending accounts for maybe approximately 60% of the total government expenditure. And the social security in South Africa, I think, is regarded as one of the largest non contributory systems in the world. And currently, I think the number of beneficiaries for social grants is sitting at 18.4 million, which accounts for an estimated 17% of the population which is dependent on state welfare, and 74% of the beneficiaries are actually children who are younger than 18 years of age. So, I think in general, we have 7 types of social grants that are currently being administered by what is called the South African Social Security Agents, which is commonly known as SASSA. These grants are aimed to improve the standards of living, to redistribute wealth, and to create a more equitable society in the country. So these 7 grants include a grant for the older persons, a disability grant, a war veteran grant, and then a care dependency grant. And then for children, there is foster child grant, a child support grant, and also a care dependency grant. So you'd find that in South Africa, many grant beneficiaries rely on the grants as their only income. And in many households, the incomes are also probably one or two grants in each and every household. So you'd find that most of the households, poor households, are actually dependent on these grants for survival. So the current socio-economic situation in the country, I think, cannot only be blamed on the global financial crisis, which is regarded as the worst economic slowdown. I think the harsh socio-economic conditions in the country, they've persisted over a period of time. And they continue to do that. So it is very important that, as much as we are saying that social South Africa has got a well-established welfare system, I think it is important that we understand the history of the development of this social welfare system up until the post-apartheid system where we are today. So let's start with the early history of the development of social welfare system in South Africa. So I'm going to take you through the important events that happened, and to just show that the early history shows a statutory system which was racially segregating and which was oppressing also, in particular, the poor and the black people. So between the years 1864 and 1899, the Dutch Reformed Church was the first to create a structured care which met the welfare needs of people in South Africa. It actually founded various institutions in the Cape Colony. And then in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a war with the British, which worsened poverty among a large number of people. And more than 26,000 white people and children and 14,000 black people died in concentration camps, which resulted in many children being orphaned. In response to this, women's charitable associations were founded in 1904, which was particularly for white people, followed by the child welfare societies for all population groups. And then a Land Act that is very important that we need to discuss of 1913 deprived black people of the right to own land outside certain demarcated areas, and they were forced to maintain links with the rural subsistence economy through a system of maybe temporary migrant labor. So the structured social welfare efforts, they actually focused almost exclusively on the white population. And this ended in an investigation by the Carnage Commission of Inquiry into the poor white problem in 1934. And this resulted in establishment of training institutions and social work in the 1930s, and the first Department of Social Welfare in 1937. However, I think it is also important to note that World War II was followed by droughts in 1945, disease and poverty, which forced people who were ill-equipped to live in modern industrial society to actually migrate to cities. So in 1948, the nationalist government then came to power and it ruled the country for 46 years. And this introduced a system of separate development, which is commonly known as the apartheid system, through institutionalized racial discrimination. And we see that because of this apartheid system, it resulted in social welfare services with 18 government administrations at national and provincial levels, which were responsible for the administration and delivery of welfare services. But despite these fragmented welfare services, a sophisticated social service delivery system actually developed. But we'd find that in 1960, political movements were actually banned, such as the ANC. So ordinary people also became involved in social service initiatives, which resulted in widespread protest against these apartheid initiated programs. So as we continue on, would find that even with the majority of South Africans not able to receive equal welfare benefits, there were three acts which were introduced in 1978, which actually changed the future welfare scene in South Africa. So these acts include the National Welfare Act, which made provision for the registration of welfare organizations. And then there was also a Funding Act, which aimed to control fundraising by the general public. And also the third one was the Social and Associated Workers Act, which made provision for a statutory council to regulate the conduct, the training, and the registration of social and associated workers. So these acts were actually very important as they resulted in certain discrete principles in the social welfare system in the 1980s, which was based on the segregation of races, state-private welfare partnerships, the rejection of socialism and the idea of a welfare state, and the movement away from a residual and therapeutic focus to a community-based preventative orientation. So during this era, then a second Carnegie inquiry into poverty and development was also launched, and this time it focused on the whole of South Africa. However, the separation of population groups was so confirmed with the new constitution in 1983, which made provision for a tricameral parliament with separate chambers for whites, coloreds, and Asians, with the exclusion of blacks. So national government programs such as the Population Development Program did not succeed in mobilizing community participation, and the country furthermore experienced growing effects of economic sanctions and a recession, which resulted in decreased funding for social welfare services. So that is the early history that I wanted you to understand. Now I want to look at the post-apartheid era. So in 1990, all the political organizations that were banned in 1960 were then unbanned. And then Nelson Mandela was released after 27 years of being in prison. So the first democratic election of the country was then held in 1994, where the ANC government of national unity came into power. In 1997, then a unified Department of Welfare started to operate. So because there was a lot of transformation that was happening, part of the transformation process then required the Department of Social Welfare to change its name to the Department of Social Development. So the new government had the opportunity to challenge the political processes of the past, which also included the handling of social welfare. So several government-led policies were introduced, and some of the examples that I can give now is the Reconstruction and Development Program and the Growth, Employment and Redistribution Strategy, and also the White Paper for Social Welfare, which had a vital impact on the shaping of social work in this new political dispensation. So the new South African government embarked in 1994 on an inclusive transformational welfare system, which was based on the principles of social development. So within the same time frame of the adoption of the socio-economic and macroeconomic policies and strategies, such as the one that I've mentioned, the RDP and the GEAR, a white paper for social development was adopted in 1997 as part of transforming the welfare system of the country. This was actually an attempt to move towards a developmental approach in social welfare, which will support a people-centered approach to social and economic development. So the social development approach actually implies what we can call a commitment to investing in human capabilities and to purposely redistribute resources on more equitable terms in order to achieve social justice. So the approach focuses on poverty eradication through building maybe what we can call people's capabilities to achieve self-sufficiency and it is largely based on a process of planned social change, which is designed to promote the well-being of population as a whole, in conjunction with a dynamic process of economic development. The developmental approach, I may say that, has been the official guide to social welfare in the country since 1997, and is actually a movement away from a residual and institutional welfare approach. And more specifically, what I can mention is that the developmental approach to social welfare, it recognizes the need for an integrated, a strength-based, and rights-based approach to social service delivery. And it also ensures and promotes the sustainability of intervention efforts, and is what has been highlighted by the Department of Social Development in 2006. It emphasizes appropriate services to all, particularly the poor, the vulnerable, and those with special needs. And it recognizes that social work, among other social service professionals, plays a major role in addressing the developmental needs of the South African society. So it is against this background that I've provided you of the development of social welfare in South Africa, the early history and the post-apartheid, that I can now discuss the current nature and context of social work in South Africa. So the current social work that is practiced in South Africa is a developmental social work. It constitutes the profession's, I think, specific contribution to the developmental approach. By definition, what I can say about developmental social work is that it is an integrated, holistic approach to social work that recognizes and responds to the interconnections between the person and the environment. It links the micro and the macro practice, and it utilizes the strength-based, the non-discriminatory models, approaches, and interventions and partnerships to promote social and economic inclusion and well-being. You'd find that when you are doing this developmental social work in South Africa, it is an integration of casework, group work, and community work, which are regarded as the primary methods of social work service delivery. I think also let me mention that the social work is actually guided by a number of legislative acts with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa primarily providing the right of access to appropriate social assistance to those who are unable to support themselves. So I've highlighted here various legislative acts that are directing social work. For example, the Children's Act, the Social Assistance Act. But in particular, I want to mention the Social Service Professions Act, which provides a regulatory which provides the regulations for a statutory, which is the South African Council for Social Service Professions, and sets out inter alia an ethical code and standards for education and training in social work. So all social workers, even including student social workers, they have to register annually with this council, the South African Council for Social Service Professions, and they are bounded by an ethical code. So I think currently the total number of social workers that are registered with this council is of March, I think 2021 was around 35,000. So a statutory process regulated by the South African Council also requires that all social workers in the country have to obtain a required number of continuing professional development, which are called CPD points, annually in order for them to remain registered with the council. So the purpose of this system is to ensure that social workers, they retain and continuously develop their knowledge and skills to maintain these professional standards. But just to highlight that of these registered social workers, 40% are employed by the government, and then the rest are employed at non-profit organizations, in private practice capacities, or maybe some of them are not active practitioners. But in spite of a recommended ratio of maybe one social worker to 60 cases, which has been recommended by the Department of Social Development, social workers actually report caseload sometimes exceeding 300 and more, which has caused burnout among the social workers. And furthermore, there is a gross discrepancy between the remuneration of social workers for those that are working for the government and those that are in private sectors, together with, I think, overall low salaries of social workers and maybe unfavorable working conditions as well, which are some of the reasons of maybe brain drain of social workers after South Africa's first democratic elections, even. I think it is also important to just highlight the range of service providers when it comes to social work, which can be divided like broadly what I've said into the government, which is the public sector, and also the non-governmental, which is the private sector. So the government sector consists of the national department, which provides maybe inter alia strategic direction for social service delivery. And then we've got the non-governmental sector, which can be distinguished as profitable as well as non-profitable. So social workers in profitable private practice, they offer a wide range of direct services, with some also rendering, for example, employee assistance programs at private companies. I think they are fulfilling an essential role in social service delivery, which is additional to the government and non-governmental social services. And then in terms of the target groups, I think let me just mention that the primary target groups that we identified by the Department of Social Development as social work service recipients are the poor and the vulnerable people in society. Specifically, these target groups include the children and the youth, the families, the women and the older people, even people infected and affected by HIV and AIDS, and people living with disabilities, and those who have other special needs also, they make up part of the target groups on the continuum of social service delivery. So in its efforts to achieve the desired outcomes for these social service recipients that I've highlighted, the Department of Social Development established a continuum of social service delivery, which are contained in what is called an integrated service delivery model for social services. So the main features for this model gives certain levels of intervention, which include prevention, early intervention, and statutory intervention, and also reconstruction and aftercare. So the core services that are rendered by social service providers have actually been grouped into five broad categories of services, namely promotion and prevention, protection services, rehabilitation services, continuing care services, and mental health and addiction services as well. So having mentioned that, let me also touch on social work education in South Africa. So the training of social workers is actually offered by 15 universities in South Africa, and the training includes a 4-year Bachelor of Social Work degree. And then from there, you can be able to specialize in a master's degree or to do a research-based Master of Social Work. And there's also offering of a doctoral degree of social work. So the Bachelor of Social Work degree, it contains an integrated theoretical and field practice component in terms of the credits, and it reflects actually a shift from the previous political dispensation rehabilitative focus to a social development approach, to a developmental approach. And I think let me also mention that currently there is a shift to a more decolonized curriculum. It is argued that the social work knowledge is characterized by a colonial domination. Therefore, this decolonized curriculum will provide an emergence of previously silenced knowledge with an Afrocentric focus. Um, and I think also, let me just mention this. I think I've mentioned this previously also, that the statutory parameters of the social work education also requires that students should be registered with the council, the South African Council for Social Service Professions, as student social workers, so that they can be able to uphold the council's ethical code. So the successful completion of the qualification then enables students to be registered as professional social workers. And in terms of the training institutions, they are organized in an association of South African social work education institutions, which is popularly known as ASASWE, in order to maintain and support a community of social work educators who are committed to the continuing development of social work education training, research, and practice. This ASASWE is also affiliated to the International Association of Schools of Social Work. Um, and probably let me just mention that for many years, professional social work associations were fragmented in South Africa owing to the country's history of cultural divide. But in 2007, the National Association for Social Workers was then established, which is affiliated to the International Federation of Social Work. And this affiliation actually grants social workers the opportunity to participate meaningfully in the global agenda for social work and social development. So I think I've come to the end of this lecture. Let me just conclude by saying that almost 2 decades after the end of the apartheid, inequality still shapes every facet of life in South Africa. Therefore, the role and function of social work within South Africa is very crucial in terms of social work interventions to help the poor and the vulnerable and the marginalized. Um, and as was the case with the South Africa's previous political dispensation, there's a need for decolonization of the social work profession in the country, which is vital in order to open even constructive dialogue and debate on social work's future core role and functions, and to capitalize on the profession's inherent strength. Thank you for listening to this lecture. We've come to the end of the lecture.